Imagine you are living in a country that the rest of the world has completely forgotten. Your economy is running on sugarcane, rice and bauxite. Your most famous historical event is, tragically, a mass suicide of a cult from the 1970s. The roads are crumbling, the power grid is a joke, and your neighbours, well, let's just say they have boundary issues. You are statistically one of the poorest nations in the Western Hemisphere. Now snap your fingers. It is today, and suddenly, you are the citizen of the only country on Earth growing at 43% a year. You have more oil per person than Saudi Arabia, Kuwait or Norway. The biggest superpowers on the planet are parking warships off your coast to protect you, and your neighbour is threatening to invade because they want your lottery ticket. Welcome to Guyana. This isn't just an economic boom, this is the biggest winning lottery ticket in human history, and it might just destroy the winner. Today we are breaking down Guyana's oil explosion. 1. The Golden Ticket. How it started. Let's rewind to May 2015. To understand how insane this story is, you have to understand where Guyana was. For decades, this country was a ghost town for investors. Geologists knew there might be oil off the coast. The Guiana Shield geological formation suggested it, but nobody could find it. Shell Oil spent years looking. They drilled, they missed, they packed up their bags, and they left. They literally gave up their rights to the block because they thought it was a dud. Enter ExxonMobil. Now, Exxon isn't exactly known for being the good guy in a Captain Planet episode, but they are known for one thing: being stubborn. They partnered with Hess and Knook, that's the Chinese National Offshore Oil Corporation, and decided to punch one last hole in the ocean floor, about 120 miles offshore. They called the well Liza 1. On May 20th, 2015, less than a week after a new government was sworn in, just to add some spice to the timing, Exxon announced they had hit pay dirt. And they didn't just find a puddle of oil, they found an ocean. They discovered the Stabroek Block. Let me give you some scale here. We're talking about 6.6 million acres of ocean. Since that first discovery, they have found over 11 billion barrels of recoverable oil equivalents. Let's do some quick napkin math so you understand why this is terrifyingly huge. Saudi Arabia has a lot of oil, right? But they also have 36 million people to share it with. Guyana has 11 billion barrels, and a population of roughly 800,000 people. That is the size of a medium neighbourhood in New York City. Or, to put it another way, that is the population of North Dakota, sitting on a resource wealth that rivals the wildest dreams of an opulent Gulf state prince. Overnight, Guyana went from a GDP of about $4 billion as basically a rounding error for a company like Apple, to an economy that tripled in size in under 5 years. Yeah, the International Monetary Fund basically broke their calculators trying to project the growth. In 2024 alone, while the rest of the world was fighting off recession and inflation, Guyana's economy grew by 43.6%. If the US economy grew that fast, every single person watching this video would be driving a gold-plated Cybertruck. But here is the dark reality of finding a golden ticket. When you win the lottery, 2 things happen immediately. 1. Long-lost cousins show up asking for money. 2. You realise you signed the ticket without reading the fine print, and that leads us to the most controversial piece of paper in South American history. 2. The deal with the devil, the 2016 contract. If you walk into a bar in Georgetown, Guyana, and whisper the words 2% royalty, you might start a fistfight. Here's why. After oil was discovered offshore, the government of Guyana and a consortium led by ExxonMobil finalised a production sharing agreement in 2016. At the time, Guyana had no oil industry, no production experience, and no negotiating leverage. Exxon, meanwhile, was one of the most powerful corporations on Earth, with revenues rivaling those of small countries. The result was a contract many experts now describe as one of the most investor-friendly oil deals in the modern era. Here are the terms that still shock economists. Royalty. Guyana receives just 2% of gross revenue. Globally, royalties in similar offshore projects are often 10-20% or more. Cost recovery. Exxon can deduct up to 75% of oil revenue to recover costs before profits are split. Profit split, the remaining 25% is divided 50-50 between Exxon and Guyana. In the early years of production, this structure means Guyana's effective take has been estimated as low as 14 to 15% of the total oil value. And then there's the controversy. The contract was not immediately made public. During that period, Exxon paid an $18 million signing bonus, which the government placed in an undisclosed account and initially denied existed. For an oil block now worth hundreds of billions, $18 million was a rounding error, but the secrecy damaged public trust. Defenders of the deal argue Guyana had no choice. Offshore drilling was risky, the country lacked data, and generous terms were necessary to attract investment. Critics argue something else entirely, that Guyana surrendered long-term national wealth because its leaders were unprepared, or worse, complicit. The contract also includes a stability clause, effectively freezing Guyana's fiscal laws for Exxon. If the government raises taxes or changes regulations, it must compensate the company for any losses. Imagine renting an apartment and telling the landlord, "You can never raise the rent, and if your taxes go up, you owe me the difference." That's the protection Exxon received. And while Guyanese citizens were still debating whether they'd been out-negotiated or outright robbed, a far larger danger was watching from the west. Because nothing attracts a bully like a small country that just found a diamond. 3. The neighbour from hell, the Essequibo crisis. You know that neighbour who lets their dog crap on your lawn, steals your newspaper, and then claims your garage actually belongs to them because their great-grandfather once looked at it. Now imagine that neighbour has one of the largest militaries in Latin America, Sukhoi fighter jets, and nothing to lose. That neighbour is Venezuela, and they want Essequibo. Essequibo makes up roughly 2/3 of Guyana. It's a vast, jungle-dense region rich in gold, diamonds, timber, and critically, it anchors the maritime boundary for Guyana's offshore oil fields. The dispute goes back over a century. In 1899, an international arbitration awarded Essequibo to what was then British Guiana, and for decades the border was treated as settled. But in the 1960s, Venezuela challenged the ruling, claiming it was illegitimate, a dispute that remains unresolved in international courts today. Fast forward to the 2020s, Venezuela's economy has collapsed. Nicolás Maduro is clinging to power. And across the border, Guyana just hit the oil jackpot. In late 2023, Maduro escalated dramatically. He held a national referendum asking Venezuelans whether the country should assert sovereignty over Essequibo. The government claimed a 95% approval rate, a number widely questioned by observers. Then came the signals. Troops moved toward the border. An airstrip was constructed near the disputed zone. Official maps were released showing Essequibo as a new Venezuelan state called Guayana Essequibo for Guyana. The imbalance is stark. The Guyana Defense Force numbers about 4,000 troops. Venezuela fields roughly 120,000, backed by armour and Russian-made fighter jets. It's not David versus Goliath, it's David versus Goliath, and David forgot his slingshot. But here's where oil flips the script. Guyana's offshore fields are operated by ExxonMobil, Hess and GNUC, companies tied directly into US, British and Chinese strategic interests. That changes everything. The United States began military flight operations over Guyana. The United Kingdom deployed the HMS Trent to regional waters. Brazil moved forces to its northern frontier and warned against escalation. The message was unmistakable. You can posture, but you don't cross this line. For now, the invasion is paused, but the tension remains. And living next to a country that has officially declared your land as its own creates a level of national anxiety no GDP growth can erase. And even without tanks crossing the border, Guyana is already facing another enemy, one that doesn't wear a uniform. It looks like a $50 salad. 4. The resource curse, aka Dutch disease. Let's talk about economics 101. But don't click away. This is the stuff that destroys empires. There is a phenomenon called Dutch disease. It's named after what happened to the Netherlands in the 1960s when they found massive natural gas reserves. Here is the mechanism. You find a ton of oil, you export the oil, and foreign cash floods into your country to buy your currency. Your currency becomes stronger, more expensive. Suddenly, your other exports, like rice, sugar, and gold, become too expensive for other countries to buy. Those industries die. Everyone rushes to work in the oil sector or the service industry supporting it. You stop making things and start importing everything. Guyana is staring down the barrel of this gun right now. Imagine you're a local teacher in Georgetown. Your salary hasn't gone up much, maybe 10% or 20% if you're lucky. But suddenly there are thousands of American engineers, British consultants and Brazilian contractors flooding the city. They have Exxon money. They need apartments. Landlords see this and say, why rent to a local teacher for $500 a month when I can rent to a Texan oil contractor for $4,000 a month? Rent prices triple. They need food. Restaurants pivot to high-end dining. Food prices skyrocket. This is the dark side of the boom. The cost of living is rising faster than the oil money can trickle down to the average citizen. This creates a dangerous two-track economy. Track 1, the oil elite. Lawyers, logistics companies, government officials, and anyone with a contract connected to the rigs. They are drinking champagne and buying property in Miami. Track 2, everyone else. The sugar cane cutters, the taxi drivers, the public servants. They are watching their country get rich while they effectively get poorer, because their dollar buys less than it did 5 years ago. Historically, Guyana was the breadbasket of the Caribbean. Demerara sugar is world famous, but who wants to cut cane in the hot sun for minimum wage when you can make 5 times that driving a truck for a logistics firm? The agricultural sector is struggling to find workers. If Guyana isn't careful in 10 years, they will be a country that has billions of dollars, but can't feed itself without importing food from Miami. And to fix this, the government has decided to do the only thing they can do: spend money. Fast. Too fast. They're trying to build an entire first world country from scratch in about 5 years. And if you've ever tried to renovate a kitchen, you know that doing it fast usually means disaster. 5. Concrete chaos, the infrastructure blitz. If you land at Chedi Jagan International Airport today, the first thing you will notice is the dust. The entire country is under construction. I'm not exaggerating. It looks like someone is playing SimCity with unlimited money cheats enabled, but they just started clicking everywhere. The government passed $1 trillion budget, in Guyanese dollars, focused on one thing: build everything now. We're talking about 12 new hospitals under construction simultaneously, a $1.9 billion gas-to-energy project intended to cut electricity costs by 50%, a massive 4-lane highway cutting through the jungle to Brazil, 7 new luxury hotels, Marriott, Hyatt, Hilton, popping up in Georgetown to house the oil execs, and the crown jewel, Silica City. Georgetown, the current capital, has a problem. It's below sea level. A seawall protects it from the Atlantic, and when it rains, the city turns into a swimming pool. With climate change, rising sea levels, Georgetown is living on borrowed time. So the president, Irfan Ali, has proposed building a brand new smart city on higher ground called Silica City. Think of it as Guyana's version of Egypt's new capital or Indonesia's Nusantara. It sounds amazing. But here is the problem: capacity. You can throw money at a problem, but you can't throw money at physics. Guyana has a shortage of sand. Yes, you heard me. They are running out of construction-grade sand and stone because they are building so much. They have a shortage of engineers. They have a shortage of labourers. To fix this, Guyana is importing labour. Thousands of workers are flying in. This changes the cultural fabric of the nation overnight. You have a small, tight-knit society of 800,000 people that is suddenly hosting a massive influx of foreign labour. And then there is the corruption risk. When you are handing out contracts for roads, bridges and hospitals at this speed, oversight tends to vanish. Who is getting the contracts? Is it the best company or the president's cousin's best friend? Global Witness and other watchdogs have already raised red flags. They warn that without strong institutions, this infrastructure boom could turn into a massive slush fund for the political elite. You're driving on a new road, but if that road washes away in 2 years because the contractor cut corners and bribed the inspector, was it real growth, or was it just a transfer of wealth? But let's pause the doom and gloom for a second, because despite the threats, the inflation and the chaos, something truly magical is happening. For the first time in history, Guyana has the power to change its destiny, and they're trying to do something no other oil state has ever done: go green with black gold. 6. The green paradox, saving the planet with oil money. This is where the story gets ironic, like vegan working at a slaughterhouse ironic. Guyana is one of the few countries on Earth that is carbon negative. That means its forests suck up more carbon than the entire country emits. It is covered in 18 million hectares of pristine Amazon rainforest. For years, the world told Guyana, please, don't cut down your trees. We need them to breathe. and Guyana said, "Cool, pay us," and the world said, "Best I can do is a thank you card." So Guyana stayed poor while keeping the world's lungs healthy. But now they have a new strategy. They are using the money from the oil, the thing that causes climate change, to save the forest, the thing that stops climate change. President Irfan Ali calls it the LCDS 2030, Low Carbon Development Strategy. Here is the masterstroke. In December 2022, Guyana sold $750 million worth of carbon credits to, wait for it, Hess Corporation. Yes, the same oil company drilling off the coast is paying the country to keep the trees standing. It creates a bizarre loop. Hess pumps oil, releasing carbon, pays Guyana for the oil, then pays Guyana again for the trees to offset the carbon. Critics call it greenwashing on a national scale. They say it's just giving big oil companies a license to pollute. But the Guyanese government argues, we are finally getting paid rent for our forest. And to be fair, they are actually distributing some of this cash. In 2023, the government started handing out checks to indigenous Amerindian villages, the people who actually live in the forest. For some of these remote villages, it was the first time they had ever seen that kind of capital. But whenever you start handing out large checks in a small country, you ignite the oldest fuse in the book. And in Guyana, that fuse is connected to a very dangerous powder keg. 7. The political powder keg, a nation divided. To understand why this oil boom is so fragile, you have to look at the people. Guyana is a nation shaped by colonial migration. Roughly 40% of the population is Indo-Guyanese, descendants of Indian indentured labourers. About 30% are Afro-Guyanese, descendants of enslaved Africans. The rest are indigenous Amerindians and people of mixed heritage. For most of Guyana's modern history, politics hasn't been about left versus right. It's been about identity versus identity. The two dominant parties reflect that divide. The PPPC, drawing most of its support from Indo-Guyanese voters. The PNCR, drawing most of its support from Afro-Guyanese voters. On paper, Guyana is a democracy with proportional representation. In practice, control of the executive branch brings disproportionate access to government jobs, contracts, and development projects. If your party loses power, your community often feels locked out until the next election. This tension nearly tore the country apart in 2020. After the election, the ruling coalition refused to concede. For nearly 5 months, Guyana had no certified government. There were accusations of fraud, court battles, street protests, and real fears of violence. Only sustained international pressure forced the final count, allowing Irfan Ali to be sworn in. Now add more than $100 billion in oil wealth to that volatile mix. The opposition claims that the benefits of the oil boom are flowing primarily to allies of the ruling party, while Afro-Guyanese communities are being left behind. Whether that claim holds up statistically almost doesn't matter. The perception alone is enough to inflame resentment. That's the danger. If half the country believes it's being excluded from the largest economic opportunity in its history, patience wears thin. Prosperity stops feeling national and starts feeling tribal. And while Guyanese politics simmers under that pressure, global powers are quietly positioning themselves nearby, not as referees, but as stakeholders. 8. The new Cold War, US versus China. You didn't think the US and China would sit this one out, did you? Guyana has suddenly become one of the most strategic squares on the South American chessboard. Team USA. The United States has a clear stake. ExxonMobil dominates Guyana's offshore oil production, and US military cooperation with Georgetown has visibly increased. Joint exercises, overflights, and security coordination are no accident. Washington wants a stable, pro-Western Guyana, not because it desperately needs the oil, but because it wants to control who does. Team China. China has been quietly embedding itself for years. Chinese firms built Georgetown's convention center, helped upgrade the airport, and financed major infrastructure projects. More importantly, CNOOC owns a 25% stake in the Stabroek block, meaning a quarter of Guyana's offshore oil profits flow through a Chinese state-owned company. Guyana is trying to balance both worlds. They rely on military backing to deter Venezuela. They rely on Chinese financing to build roads, airports, and public works. That balancing act works, until it doesn't. If competition between Washington and Beijing hardens into open confrontation, Guyana won't be able to stay neutral. When you're a small country sitting on massive oil reserves, neutrality isn't a policy, it's a luxury you don't get to afford. 9. The fork in the road, Qatar or Nigeria. So we arrive at the trillion-dollar question, the one keeping every economist, politician and citizen in Georgetown awake at night. In 10 years, will Guyana be the next Qatar, or will it be the next Nigeria? Because right now, Guyana is standing at a fork in the road. Scenario A, the Caribbean Qatar. In this version of the future, the government actually pulls it off. They manage the Natural Resource Fund responsibly, legally domiciled in Guyana, with accounts held at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and resist the temptation to treat it like a piggy bank. Oil money is invested into education, infrastructure, and long-term productivity. The University of Guyana is transformed into a serious regional research hub. Roads are built and maintained. The gas-to-energy project works as planned, cutting electricity costs by as much as 50%, unlocking manufacturing and reducing the cost of living. Over time, the economy diversifies. Oil funds ecotourism, agriculture modernization, and climate-resilient industries. Programs aimed at national unity begin to matter because rising prosperity lowers the stakes of ethnic politics. Some form of direct citizen benefit, whether dividends, tax relief, or public services, ensures the wealth feels shared. The world starts calling Guyana the Dubai of the Caribbean. It sounds like a fairy tale, but it happened in Norway, it happened in the UAE. It is possible. Scenario B, the resource trap. This is the darker path, and statistically, the more common one. Dutch disease sets in, agriculture collapses, sugar and rice die because oil pays better. The economy becomes hostage to global energy prices. When oil crashes, in 2032, 2035, whenever, government revenue evaporates overnight. But spending doesn't stop. Institutions weaken, corruption hardens, political divisions sharpen as the pie shrinks. Violence replaces compromise. Infrastructure decays, the hotels empty, the rainforest slowly reclaims the roads. This is the story of Venezuela. This is the story of Angola. Right now, Guyana is trying to sprint between the raindrops. They're spending fast enough to develop, but hoping to avoid inflation. Partnering with Exxon, while trying not to be owned by Exxon. Balancing the US and China. Managing ethnic politics with oil money pouring in. It is the most dangerous high-wire act in modern economics. And here's the terrifying part. They're doing it with a population smaller than Columbus, Ohio. Imagine giving the budget of a small empire to a city council and saying, build a civilization in 5 years, don't mess it up, and the whole world is watching. 10 final thoughts. There's a saying in Guyana, 1 Dutty-Bill Dam. It means that small pieces, added up over time, build a barrier. It's about patience. It's about slow, steady progress. But oil doesn't care about patience. Oil is fast. Oil is explosive. What is happening in Guyana right now is a test of human nature. It is a test to see if a small, historically divided nation can handle the kind of wealth that usually destroys people. If they succeed, they become a blueprint for the global south. Proof that rapid resource wealth doesn't have to end in collapse. If they fail, they will be just another cautionary tale in the history books, another example of the curse of black gold. But for the people living there right now, it doesn't feel like a case study. It feels like hope. It feels like fear. It feels like holding a winning lottery ticket while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. So, what do you think? If you were the president of Guyana, what would be your first move? Would you renegotiate the contract and risk Exxon leaving, or would you take the cash and run? Let me know in the comments below. I actually read them, and I want to see your strategy. If you want to understand how oil prices are manipulated by global superpowers, click this video right here. It explains why your gas prices are so high. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.